The afternoon sun glared against the steel and glass towers of Lower Manhattan, casting long, sharp shadows across the lobby of Westron Corporation's headquarters. Inside, the building was a quiet storm of muted conversations, the rhythmic clicking of polished shoes on marble floors, and the ever-present hum of artificial air. Everyone seemed in a rush, yet somehow detached, like moving parts of a massive machine they didn't quite understand. At exactly 3:20 p.m., a man in a faded gray janitor's uniform pushed open the side entrance and stepped in, unnoticed. He was tall, with a slight stoop that made him look smaller than he actually was. His thinning gray hair was tucked beneath a worn-out cap, and he wore black-rimmed glasses that looked like they belonged in the 1980s. In his hand was a rolling cart stacked with cleaning supplies, a mop handle tied down with string, and a lunchbox wrapped in duct tape. He moved slowly, deliberately, avoiding eye contact. No one paid him any attention. In a building that valued productivity over presence, he was invisible. But if anyone had stopped to look closely, they might have recognized the man as Robert Walker, co-founder and former CEO of Westron Corporation, the very man whose name still adorned the bronze plaque in the lobby's East Wing. They might have remembered the photographs from a decade ago, the speeches, the awards, the articles titled "The Mind Behind the Machine." But Robert had vanished from public life after suffering a near-fatal heart attack 2 years prior. He'd handed control of the company to his son, Eric Walker, then disappeared from corporate memory just as quickly as he had built it. Now, Robert was back. But not as the chairman. Not even as a visitor. He had returned in the uniform of a night janitor. This was not a whim. It was a calculated decision. He had heard things, whispers from former colleagues, alarming letters from low-level employees that found their way to his personal P.O. box. Allegations of toxic management, of internal corruption, of the company losing its moral core. For months, Robert had debated whether to believe them. After all, corporations evolve. People change. Perhaps he was just out of touch. But when one of Westron's minority shareholders, an old friend from their early startup days, confided that he was preparing to pull out because of serious ethical concerns, Robert knew he had to act. He couldn't return as a board member without raising alarms. He needed to see it himself. Unfiltered. Uncurated. And so, under an alias, James Rowland, he applied for a custodial position through a third-party maintenance firm. No one questioned him. No one ran a full background check. After all, who would think to scrutinize a 64-year-old janitor? On his first day, Robert was assigned to clean the 27th through 30th floors, corporate strategy, operations, and executive suites. It was exactly what he wanted. That afternoon, he stood in the back hallway of the 28th floor, watching employees shuffle out of a team meeting. Their faces were expressionless, drained. A young woman, no more than 25, was wiping her eyes discreetly as she returned to her desk. No one stopped to ask if she was okay. Later, during his scheduled break, Robert walked into the staff cafeteria. It was divided subtly, open seating for general staff and a cordoned-off section labeled Executive Lounge. There were no signs, but the social boundaries were clearer than glass. He took a seat at an empty table near the wall, pulled out his modest sandwich, and began eating. Within minutes, a man in an expensive tailored suit approached. His face was clean-shaven, his hair gelled back with surgical precision. He wore the practiced confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. "Hey pal," the man said, his voice low and cutting. "You don't belong here. This section is for corporate personnel." Robert looked up, feigning confusion. "Just eating my lunch." The man's smile was tight. "Then eat it somewhere else." He grabbed Robert's water bottle and knocked it off the table, letting it roll across the floor. A few employees glanced over, but quickly turned back to their meals. No one intervened. Robert didn't retaliate. He simply stood up, picked up his bottle, and moved to a corner near the vending machines. He watched as the suited man returned to a table, laughing with two others. From a patch on his blazer, Robert caught the name, Lucas Dean, head of internal operations. The same name he had heard in multiple anonymous emails, described as vindictive, manipulative, untouchable. Robert Med à Montalnotte. That night, after finishing his shift, he sat in a small apartment in Queens he had rented under his alias. It was modest, barely furnished, a mattress on the floor, a single lamp on the desk. He opened a leather notebook and began writing. D1.
Observait de style management behavior. No HR présence visible.
Executives operate in silos. Cultural fracture apparent. This is not the company I built. He paused. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of grief. He had envisioned Westron as a company built on innovation, yes, but also integrity. The motto carved into the main lobby wall had read, "Build what matters." Now, it felt like no one remembered what that meant. He flipped to a new page. Tomorrow, I'll begin watching patterns, meetings, personnel dynamics, floor access logs. There's more here than just bad attitudes. I can feel it. He closed the notebook and exhaled. This was only the beginning. But Robert Walker had never been afraid of beginning again. Especially when the soul of everything he built was on the line. The next morning, Robert arrived at Westron's headquarters well before dawn. The city was still half asleep, the streets wet with overnight rain. In the silence of early hours, the building loomed like a silent monolith, its windows reflecting nothing but fog. He scanned his ID badge, James Rowland, facilities staff, and entered through the side security gate. The guard barely looked up. Robert changed into his uniform and pushed his cart toward the elevator, glancing at the floor schedule posted inside. He chose to begin on the 27th floor, corporate strategy. By 6:15 a.m., the office was still mostly empty. Only a few early risers lingered in glass-walled meeting rooms or hunched over desks. The quiet allowed Robert to observe without interruption. He moved slowly, cleaning breakroom counters, emptying bins, pretending not to listen as two mid-level analysts debated metrics from a recent internal audit. "It doesn't add up," said one. Operating expenses for Q2 were off by almost 9% compared to projections. "That's the Dean's shuffle," the other replied with a knowing smirk. "Shift enough line items between departments, and it disappears." Robert didn't react, but he recorded the names he overheard: Ethan Myers, Maria Cho. After finishing the floor, he took the service elevator to the 29th, executive planning. Here, the atmosphere was different.
Leadership. Modern article.
Coffee machines that cost more than a month's salary. Even the air felt colder, recycled too many times through filters designed for aesthetics, not comfort. It was here he saw her.
The young woman from the day before, the one who wiped away tears leaving the meeting room.
She sat alone at her cubicle, earbuds in, reviewing what looked like a dense financial report. He pushed his cart slowly past her desk, then paused as she looked up. Their eyes met briefly. She removed her earbuds. "Morning," she said softly, as if not quite sure if she should address a janitor. Robert nodded. "Morning."
Early start.
She smiled faintly. "Early every day. Marketing campaigns don't build themselves." He noticed the nameplate on her desk, Emily Carter, Junior Marketing Analyst. "James," he said, offering his gloved hand. She hesitated, then shook it. "Nice to meet you," she said. "Most people don't even bother saying hello."
Robert shrugged.
"I've learned that people show who they are in the small things." That caught her attention.
You sound like a philosophie professor in a janitoress uniform.
He chuckled. "Maybe I'm just an old guy who reads too much." Before she could respond, her screen pinged. A message appeared, urgent. She glanced at it, frowned, and stood up quickly. "Sorry. Meeting." She hurried down the hall toward a closed-door conference room. Robert watched as she disappeared inside. Through the glass, he saw her seated across from a man in a gray suit, rigid posture, slick hair, expressionless eyes.
Lucadine.
Robert recognized him instantly. 15 minutes later, Emily left the room, her face pale. She didn't return to her desk. Instead, she went straight to the women's restroom. Robert waited a few minutes, then resumed cleaning near the hallway. When she emerged, her eyes were red. She carried herself stiffly, like someone trying not to fall apart. He didn't say anything, but his expression must have given something away. Emily paused.
Don't worry.
It's just work stress. Robert nodded. That kind of stress leaves bruises you can't see. She hesitated.
How do you know?
I've seen it before.
Différents places. Sam Shadow.
She looked away. I don't think there's much anyone can do. Robert wanted to tell her she was wrong, that every change in history had started with someone saying enough, but he held back. Trust was built in inches, not leaps. Instead, he simply said, "If you ever feel like talking, I've got a quiet broom closet and a decent thermos of coffee." That made her laugh, if only for a second. Later that day, during his lunch break, Robert sat outside in the small courtyard near the loading docks. He opened his notebook and made detailed notes.
Emily Carter.
Smart.
Under pressure.
Possibly targeted. Meeting with Lucas Dean. Emotional reaction. Monitor closely. He flipped to another page and began sketching a basic map of the 27th to 30th floors, marking locations of cameras, offices, locked doors, and frequently used rooms. He had no illusions. Westron was a fortress, and what he was doing now to expose its cracks would be dismissed as paranoid if he wasn't careful. But he knew what silence bred. He had seen it before in boardrooms, in funding meetings, in corners where ambitious men made decisions behind closed doors and smiled in public. When he returned to the 30th floor later that afternoon, he noticed something new. The door to the central record room was ajar. It was a place typically locked tight.
Curiosity prickled. It peeked inside.
Stacks of documents sat on a metal cart, waiting to be scanned. Among them, several folders bore internal review seals. He didn't touch them, but one label caught his eye. Campaign Budget Reallocation Q2, signed approval. His heart beat faster. He'd heard rumors that Westron had funneled marketing funds into off-book accounts to cover legal settlements, none of which were reflected in the quarterly earnings report. But just then, a voice behind him said, "You lost." It was Ethan Myers, the analyst from earlier. Robert straightened.
Looking for the supply closet.
Got turned around. Ethan didn't look suspicious. Just bored. Down the hall, third door left. "Don't worry, this place is a maze." Robert smiled and nodded. As he walked away, he noticed a camera above the hallway, blinking red. He made another mental note. That evening, as he left the building, the weight of the day pressed heavier on his shoulders. He walked past the front security desk, where a screen showed rotating footage from the building's internal surveillance system. He recognized the hallway he'd been in. The camera had definitely seen him. For now, no one knew who he really was. But that wouldn't last forever. He would have to move carefully. Because somewhere in this building, someone was watching just as closely as he was. And they might not be as patient. 3 days passed. Robert spent each of them quietly moving between floors, cleaning, listening, watching. He memorized door codes, shift rotations, which cameras blinked and which ones were decoys. Years in leadership had taught him to read structure like a blueprint. One flaw, one loose bolt, could collapse everything. And Westron, for all its sleek surfaces and polished marketing, had more loose bolts than he could count. Each morning, Emily showed up earlier. Each evening, she left later. Robert noticed the deepening circles under her eyes, the stiffness in her walk, the way she flinched every time her phone buzzed. On Thursday afternoon, as she stepped out of the elevator on the 28th floor, Robert was mopping near the water cooler. Their eyes met, and she stopped. "Got that coffee you promised?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. Robert nodded. "Storage room B2.
10 minutes.
She slipped away without a word. 10 minutes later, she walked into the dim supply line space where Robert waited.
2 folding chairs. A thermos.
A silence heavy enough to stretch. He poured her a cup. She wrapped her hands around it like a shield. "Rough week?" he asked. She gave a short laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "They've been pushing me to revise campaign invoices. Changing language. Removing vendor names. I asked why, and suddenly I'm being left off meetings. I'm not stupid, I know what they're doing." Robert nodded. "Trying to make you complicit." She looked up. "Exactly. If I do it, I'm involved."
If he refuse, à main subordinate.
"You're being cornered. They think I'll cave. Will you?" Her eyes hardened slightly. "Not yet. But I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending." Robert took a slow sip of coffee. "You don't need to pretend. But you need to be smart."
Document everything. Don't delete. Don't forward.
Just store. Emily stared at him. Who are you really?
Nos janitors talk like this.
He smiled. Let's just say I know how these games are played. She didn't press further. She simply nodded and said, okay. That night, Robert returned to his apartment and opened his notebook.
Emily Carter, willing to act. Under pressure.
Showed signs of moral clarity and risk tolerance. Potential ally. Protect at all costs. He stared at the words for a long time. The phrase protect at all costs reminded him of his own daughter Hannah, who had passed away 10 years earlier from a sudden illness. She would have been Emily's age now. And just like Emily, she had always fought back when something felt wrong.
Always stood allée d'Enerfear.
He rubbed his eyes and kept writing.
New target, Lucadine.
Track his digital footprint. Track executive meeting patterns. Watch for contact with CFO. On Friday morning, Robert changed his routine. Instead of the usual top-down sweep, he began on the 27th floor and slowly worked his way upward, methodically delaying his cleaning schedule to match the executive meeting times he had tracked over the week. At precisely 10:30 a.m., he stationed himself outside a glass-walled conference room on the 30th floor, pretending to dust a windowsill. Inside, Lucas Dean sat with CFO Matthew Gray and a man Robert didn't recognize, a sharp-featured executive with a tight jaw and predatory stillness.
Through the slight crack in the sliding door, Robert cocked a snippet.
We need to move the funds before the next audit cycle.
End the committee.
They won't look twice. Especially not if we mask it as PR restructuring. The third man spoke, voice crisp and cold. Then use the Q3 campaign as cover. Run it through Carter's department.
She's a nobody.
If she pushes back, we cut her. Cut her how? The CFO asked.
Lucas shrugged.
HR complaint.
Performance review.
Emotional instability. Pick one. Robert stopped wiping. He had heard enough. Back in the janitor's closet, he pulled out a small recorder. He played back what he had just captured. The quality was faint, muffled, but clear enough. He marked the file, labeled it exec_threat_Emily_30F to wave, and uploaded it to an encrypted USB drive stored in his personal locker. He then wrote in his journal.
Direct evidence of executive conspiracy. Malicieux int toward Carter.
Risk of retaliation high.
Must act soon.
At lunch, Robert found Emily in the courtyard again. She looked more exhausted than usual. He handed her a small paper bag.
What is this? Flash drive. Don't plug it in at work.
Wait until you're on a secure device. Use headphones.
What is on there will change how you see everything.
She hesitated. You're trusting me with something big. I wouldn't give it to you if I didn't think you could handle it. She looked at the bag like it might burn her hands. Then she nodded, slowly. That evening, Emily sat on her apartment floor with the drive plugged into her personal laptop. She hit play. It took 23 seconds for her expression to shift from confusion to horror. She listened to the whole thing twice. When it ended, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at the screen and whispered, "They were going to ruin me." The next day, she didn't show up to work. Neither did Robert. Instead, they met in a small co-working space in Brooklyn, rented under a shell account Robert had set up years ago during his active years in cybersecurity compliance. Emily slid a folder across the table. Internal budget sheets from Q2. Redacted vendor logs. 2 sets of campaign drafts, one public, one internal. They've been laundering money through fake marketing costs.
Robert flipped through the papers, nodding.
Can we prove it? He asked. With this? Maybe. But it's still circumstantial. Robert reached into his coat, pulled out another USB. This, he said, isn't. Emily took it. What is it? Server logs. Dean's email history.
Time-stamped approval.
You won't find these on your network access. They're scrubbed clean on the front end. But I knew where to look. She looked at him again with that same question in her eyes. Who are you really? He smiled, faintly.
Let's just say.
I built the firewalls they forgot to check. Emily leaned back, exhaling. So what do we do next? We go public, Robert said. But smartly. Not with outrage. With truth. Precision.
End de documentation.
And if they come after us? They will. Then. Robert folded his hands. Then we make sure they regret ever thinking we were small enough to crush. By Monday morning, the storm had not arrived, but the clouds had gathered. Emily Carter returned to the Westron headquarters in a dark overcoat and black slacks, her hair pinned tighter than usual, her face unreadable.
She walked through the glass doors like a woman going into battle.
Robert arrived an hour earlier, as always, dressed in his janitor uniform. But now he carried more than rags and cleaning spray. Tucked inside the false bottom of his cart was a compact hard drive containing a synchronized copy of every document he and Emily had gathered. They had decided over the weekend that exposure alone wasn't enough. The system they were up against had contingency plans, lawyers, spin doctors, and a deeply ingrained culture of silence. If they wanted to shake it, they needed to be precise, patient, and absolutely unforgiving. At 9:15 a.m., Emily sent an anonymous tip with attachments to 3 outlets.
1. The New York Ledger's Business Integrity Desk. 2. SEC Whistleblower Division. 3. Forbes Tech Transparency Uni.
She used a public cafe Wi-Fi and a VPN routed through Iceland. By 9:42 a.m., someone in the internal IT team flagged an abnormal packet signature in the firewall logs. Within minutes, an alert reached Lucas Dean's office. By 10:10 a.m., Lucas stood in front of Emily's cubicle. His smile was thin. "Miss Carter," he said.
Mind stepping into my office?
She looked up slowly, then nodded, grabbing a pen and a notepad. "Of course." Robert, mopping a nearby hallway, turned ever so slightly toward them. Inside Lucas's glass-walled office, the blinds were drawn.
No audience. No recording.
Just pressure. "You've been busy," Lucas said, leaning against his desk.
Late night. Extra révision. Some unapproved document access.
Emily didn't blink.
I've been catching up.
Q3 deadlines are aggressive. Very dedicated. Though I wonder, have you been reviewing files beyond your pay grade? That would violate company policy. Lucas tilted his head. Wouldn't it just? Silence settled between them. Then he smiled again, stepping closer. "I'd hate to see a promising career derailed over a misunderstanding. Or worse, over some misguided attempt at heroism." Emily stared at him.
I'm not a hero, she said softly.
"But I know what cowards look like."
Lucas' smile faltered.
His jaw clenched, just for a moment. "You should go home," he said finally.
Take the day.
"Think hard about your future here." "I already have." She stood and walked out without another word. At 11:30 a.m., Robert met her on the roof of the parking structure, where few employees ever went. "He suspects," she said. "Probably knows." "He'll move fast now," Robert replied. "We have one window. Hours, maybe." They reviewed the plan again. That afternoon, at 2 p.m., Robert entered the 30th floor server room. His access was only supposed to allow him to clean the hallway. But he'd spent years designing back-end protocols for Westron in the early days. He knew the blind spots, knew how to time the camera rotations and which auxiliary port hadn't been upgraded during the last security overhaul. In 12 minutes, he plugged in the hard drive, triggered a secure upload, and logged the final time-stamped interactions of the 3 executives, Lucas Dean, CFO Matthew Gray, and CIO Jonathan Wynn. By 2:15 p.m., the drive was removed. Clean. Cold. Gone. Meanwhile, Emily scheduled a fake vendor meeting for 2:30 p.m. with the internal compliance officer, Mary Bell. Mary was a lifer at Westron. She had survived 5 rounds of leadership turnover and twice as many ethics seminars. But she had a reputation: fair, incorruptible, unflinching. Emily handed her a sealed envelope across the desk. Mary raised an eyebrow. "This isn't protocol." "I know," Emily said. "But what's inside isn't supposed to be either." She left before Mary could open it. Inside the envelope was a printed transcript of the audio Robert had captured, marked by timestamps, along with a note that read, "This is not the only copy. We come forward now because we believe Westron deserves better. We ask for an internal freeze of accounts pending external review. If no action is taken, the full files will be released publicly by Friday. At 3 p.m., Robert and Emily left the building separately, not speaking, not signaling. By 5:15 p.m., they were both called individually by unknown numbers. Neither answered. By 6 p.m., the first response arrived, not from Westron, but from the New York Ledger. The email was brief. We've received and verified the documents. Our legal team is preparing for publication. Do you wish to remain anonymous? Emily forwarded the message to Robert with one word, yes. The next morning, the headline ran above the fold. Westron execs implicated in internal cover-up, whistleblower exposes millions in fraudulent accounting. The article was scathing. It named no employees, but cited direct audio transcripts, document excerpts, and internal timestamps. The Ledger had verified with 2 former compliance consultants and 1 SEC source off the record. By 10 a.m., Westron's stock dropped 4.7%. By 11 a.m., the board of directors held an emergency meeting. At 12:15 p.m., Lucas Dean was escorted out of the building by corporate security. Emily watched from her cubicle.
She said nothing.
Her hands didn't shake. Robert, in the hallway, kept mopping. At 2:30 p.m., a global company-wide email was sent from the acting chair of the board. Effective immediately, an independent investigation will be launched to review all claims cited in recent media coverage. We ask employees to come forward voluntarily with any information related to internal misconduct. The message ended with a statement of values.
Robert read it slowly.
He had written those values 12 years ago. Most of them hadn't changed. But something had changed now.
The silence was broken.
The machine had stuttered. That evening, he returned to his apartment, turned off the lights, and sat by the window with his notebook. He wrote only one line. The first wall has cracked.
The foundation will follow.
He closed the book, folded his hands, and waited for the next move. Because this wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 days after the exposé, Westron was no longer the same company. The lobby that once radiated silent confidence now buzzed with apprehension. Conversations dropped to whispers when senior managers passed. Employees who used to nod with mild civility now glanced over their shoulders before speaking. Everyone knew something had changed, but no one knew where the axe would fall next.
Emily Carter walked through it all like a ghost.
She kept her head down, did her work, and avoided eye contact. But in her pocket, she carried a new company phone, one issued directly by the board's internal investigation team. Her access to files had been expanded. Her name wasn't made public, but some already suspected. She received stares from those who might have guessed and silence from those who definitely knew. Meanwhile, Robert remained in the background. The janitor uniform still fit, though barely. But now, he walked with a different rhythm, not one of secrecy, but of observation. He didn't need to hide anymore. In a company on edge, the overlooked man had become a dangerous unknown. But danger had a way of recognizing its own. On Friday afternoon, Robert returned from the loading dock to find a small, unmarked envelope taped to the inside of his locker.
No return address. No name.
Inside was a single Polaroid photo, grainy, taken from a distance. It showed Robert, out of uniform, in the Brooklyn co-working space, speaking with Emily. Scrolled on the back were 5 words, "We know who you are." He stood motionless for a long time. They had found him. That night, Robert sat across from Emily in a quiet bookstore cafe in Soho. The lights were dim, the tables half empty. He slid the photo across to her. Her eyes widened. "They're watching us," she said. "They were always watching. Now they've decided to show it."
Do we back off?
Robert didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "The moment you start fearing shadows, they win. We stay the course."
Emily exhaled slowly.
"Okay. Then we hit back." They began working on Phase 2 that night. It wasn't enough to expose Lucas Dean and the upper circle.
The row went deeper.
CFO Matthew Gray had quietly stepped down that morning for personal reasons, and the acting board chair had publicly promised reform. But Robert knew better. Reform didn't come from polite memos. It came from fear. From pressure. From collapse. At midnight, Robert sent an encrypted email to a longtime ally in D.C., a retired forensic auditor named Victor Malone. Attached were documents pointing to systematic financial laundering between Westron and 3 shell companies registered offshore. By 9 a.m. Monday, Victor responded, "This is real."
Elle te quitte tous bureau.
At 10:30 a.m., Emily received an anonymous message on her internal company portal. "They're pulling your private messages from 2 months ago. HR is building a case. Be careful." At noon, Robert noticed 2 new men in black suits loitering near the executive floor elevator. They didn't wear company badges. They didn't smile. They were private security, contracted, expensive, and entirely untraceable through regular channels. By 2:15 p.m., Robert was called into the facilities manager's office. The man behind the desk, Todd Morrison, looked nervous, sweaty.
"I got a request from above.
Says your background needs re-verification." Robert kept his face neutral. "I submitted everything when I was hired." Todd tapped a file folder. "You did. But someone's asking again."
High priority.
"I don't know what you've stepped into, man, but you might want to lay low." Robert nodded once. "Thanks for the heads up." That evening, Robert met Emily in a parking garage on 33rd Street. She handed him a plain manila envelope. "Here. Printout of internal memos from HR. They're drafting a termination request. For you. For both of us." He glanced through the pages. The language was coded professional, but the intention was clear. The whistleblower and the janitor were being cut out. Robert folded the documents carefully. "They want to erase us before we can finish." Emily nodded. "So what do we do?" "We give them something they can't erase." On Tuesday morning, Robert made his first official move in public. He walked into the main atrium of Westron, removed his janitor's cap, and handed a sealed envelope to the receptionist. "This is for the board."
From Robert Walker.
She blinked.
I'm sorry, who?
"Tell them the founder says hello." By noon, every member of the board had received his letter. Inside it was a confession, a warning, and a threat. "I came back not to destroy Westron, but to find out if it was still worth saving. What I found was silence, rot, and fear. The employees who build this place every day are afraid of the very people meant to lead them. That ends now. If the company wants to survive, it must change. Fully. Now. Otherwise, I will not only go public, I will testify." He signed it with his full name, Robert A. Walker, co-founder, Westron Corporation. The emails started flying within the hour. By 3 p.m., Robert received an unexpected message from the acting chair, Judith Lang.
Monsieur Walker, I request a private meeting.
"Please name your time." He replied, "Tonight. 8 p.m.
Off-site. Discreet."
They met in a quiet library room at Columbia University, where no cameras followed, and no staff lingered. Judith was sharp-eyed, iron-willed, and clearly furious. "You blindsided the board." "No," Robert said.
I gave you a choice. You realize if this goes public, we could lose everything.
"I'm counting on that."
Judith leaned forward. "What do you want?" "Accountability."
"Full external audit. Dean removed permanently."
"Transparency with the public."
"And a public platform for our whistleblower."
"Impossible." "Not impossible. Just inconvénient."
Judith's jaw tightened.
You've lost your mind. Robert stood slowly.
"I built this company from a garage in Jersey with 10 grand and a used laptop."
You want to talk about losing?
"Losing is forgetting why we started in the first place." He walked to the door, then paused. "You have 48 hours. And with that, the founder turned and left the room, leaving the future of Westron in the hands of those who had forgotten him. But now, they remembered. And they were afraid. By the time dawn broke on Wednesday, Robert Walker's ultimatum had begun echoing beyond the walls of Westron. The New York Ledger published a follow-up story at 7:05 a.m. It included not just new documents leaked anonymously overnight, but a quote that appeared verbatim, from the letter Robert had sent the board.
The cut it like a thunderclap across a corporate world.
"I came back not to destroy Westron, but to find out if it was still worth saving." The media seized on the phrase. The founder's reckoning, one outlet called it. Others speculated that Robert had re-emerged to reclaim control of the company. Investors panicked. Employees whispered. And still, the board had not yet responded publicly. Emily read the article from her apartment kitchen, phone buzzing non-stop. Her inbox filled with anonymous notes of support from co-workers and LinkedIn connections she hadn't spoken to in years. Some called her brave. Others asked if she had more evidence. A few warned her to stay safe. She didn't feel brave. She felt watched. At 8:37 a.m., her building's intercom buzzed.
Delivery for Emily Carter.
She hadn't ordered anything. Her breath caught.
Slowly, she pressed the button.
Who's it from?
Silence.
Then a voice. You think you're untouchable? She backed away from the speaker.
The line cut. She dialed Robert.
He answered on the second ring. They're testing us, he said. They want to scare you into silence. It's working. No, it's not.
You restis standing.
She clenched the phone. What now? Now, Robert said, we push. That morning, Judith Lang, interim chair of the board, called an emergency executive assembly. No press.
No recording.
Just the top 20 executives and a locked conference room on the 35th floor. Robert watched from the service hallway, where the old security camera still had a blind spot between the stairwell and HVAC panel. He didn't need to hear what they were saying. He knew the playbook. Contain.
Rebrand.
Cut ties. Minimize. But something was different now. This time, the founder was not silent. And neither was the public. By noon, the Securities and Exchange Commission issued a formal inquiry into Westron's financials. Anonymous sources within the SEC confirmed to Reuters that they had significant preliminary evidence of misconduct. At 1:20 p.m., Emily received a message from someone in legal.
Watch your step.
IT flagged you pulling archived vendor invoices. They're trying to build a breach of contract case. She closed her laptop and left the office without a word. At 2:40 p.m., she met Robert on the roof of a municipal library in Midtown. They're coming after me. And I think they're going to try to discredit you next. They already are, Robert said. He handed her a printed page, a leaked blog post claiming Robert was mentally unstable, citing a decade-old hospitalization after his daughter's death. Emily read the words carefully. They're rewriting your story. They always do.
Do you want me to respond? Robert shook his head. Let them talk.
Our truth is still louder. She looked at him. Then we need to give them more. That night, they launched the second drop. A 40-page dossier released anonymously to The Intercept and Bloomberg. Contents included a confidential emails between Dean and offshore consultants, a proof of campaign budget laundering across 3 fiscal quarters, a redacted names of cooperating employees requesting protection, the timeline of internal retaliation, including threats and terminations.
The file spread like wildfire.
News anchors debated whether Westron was too big to collapse. Commentators praised the whistleblowers. Anonymous employees on Twitter shared their own stories of abuse, silence, and complicity. By midnight, #WestronWhistle was trending globally. And inside Westron headquarters, fear turned into fracture. Some executives began quietly contacting investigators. Others deleted files. A few packed their offices in silence, trying to leave before the collapse. But collapse was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. The next morning, Judith Lang reached out to Robert. Her tone was clipped. You win. The board will issue a public statement by end of day. Full audit.
Full coopération.
Robert's voice was calm. It's not about winning. It's about cleansing. You just set fire to $1 billion company.
No. Y'en dead use match. You struck it yourself. Judy tenue up.
At noon, Robert stood before the Westron employees in a live-streamed town hall. His janitor uniform was gone. He wore a plain black suit. No tie. No pin.
Juste présence.
He stood behind a simple podium. The room was filled, and tens of thousands watched online. I came back not to remind this company who I am, he began, but to remind it who you are.
Silence.
You built this company. With ideas. With sweat. With belief. And somewhere along the way, those who sat above you began to believe that power exempted them from integrity. They were wrong. He let that linger. We were wrong. He inhaled. But mistakes only define us if we run from them.
Today, we stop running.
He looked directly at the camera. To those who came forward, you are the future of Westron. To those who stayed silent out of fear, you are still welcome, if you choose courage now. And to those who harmed others and hid behind systems and titles, your time is over. The applause began slowly, then rose like a wave. He stepped back. In the crowd, Emily stood near the rear wall, her eyes wet but unbroken. Around her, co-workers clapped, some cautiously, others with genuine relief. The culture was shifting. Not because of policy, but because of truth. Later that day, Robert and Emily met on the steps outside the building. Neither spoke for a while. Then she asked, "Is it really over?"
Robert shook his head.
No. But it's finally begun. The aftermath of the town hall spread through Westron like the tremors of an earthquake. For the first time in years, people spoke freely, sometimes cautiously, sometimes too loudly, but they spoke. The silos that had divided departments began to crumble. Even the most cynical of employees had to admit, something had changed. Yet with the shaking of old walls came uncertainty. The board's official audit began the next morning. A third-party firm moved in with boxes of documents, forensic accountants, and a cold efficiency that made even innocent employees nervous. Emily sat at her desk, pouring through a backlog of emails when a message popped up from the board's temporary ethics liaison. "Miss Carter, please report to conference room B at 3 p.m. for formal recognition and review." She stared at the message.
Recognition and review.
It could mean a commendation.
Or a key warning.
At 2:55 p.m., she walked in. The room was bare. 2 members of the ethics committee sat across from her, expressionless. The older woman spoke first. "Miss Carter, we want to begin by acknowledging your actions. Your decision to come forward helped trigger essential reforms." Emily remained silent. "But we also must evaluate the procedural implications. You accessed internal documents without clearance, breached communication policies, and shared data outside the company without legal approval."
Émilie Tanced.
"I did what I had to do." The man nodded.
Understood.
"That's why the board has chosen not to pursue disciplinary action. However, your role at Westron must change."
Émilie blinked.
"What do you mean?" "We're offering you a position as the head of our new Office of Integrity and Employee Advocacy. You'll report directly to the board, not to any executive. You'll oversee the very systems you helped expose." She stared at them. "Why me?"
The woman leaned forward.
"Because you didn't just challenge a system, you endured it. You understand what silence costs." Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. "And what does it pay?" "Hope," the woman replied. At 5 p.m., as she walked through the lobby, employees she didn't know stopped to nod. Some smiled. One whispered, "Thank you." But the weight of those thanks settled heavily on her shoulders. She hadn't done it alone. And she hadn't come through it unscarred. That night, she met Robert again, this time at an old jazz bar in the West Village, quiet, smoky, anonymous. She sat across from him, newly promoted, newly wary. "They gave me an office. A title. A mission. I should be happy, but I don't know if I trust it." Robert nodded slowly. "That's good. Don't trust it. Measure it. Challenge it. Change it." She looked at him for a long time. "You still haven't told me why you really came back." He sipped his drink, silent. Then he said, "After my daughter died, I lost the will to build anything. Westron was supposed to be a legacy, for her, for what she believed in. When I saw what it had become, I had to know if it was salvageable. And now," he smiled faintly, "now I know the truth. Westron isn't my legacy.
People like you are."
She swallowed hard. Across town, while the bar's soft trumpet solo drifted into the night, the press was already preparing their next wave of stories. A reporter at Bloomberg, who had received an anonymous second drop, called Robert's personal number. He didn't answer. The voicemail filled with questions. What was his role now? Would he retake the company? Would he go public? Was he running for office? Robert ignored them all. Instead, he opened his email to find a message from Victor Malone, the former auditor in D.C.
The bureau is moving.
Multiple charges likely. But you should prepare. Once indictments drop, you'll be pulled into it.
Robert read it twice.
He had expected it. But still, the chill ran down his spine. He walked to the window of his apartment and looked out at the city. It was dusk. Lights flickered in the windows of towers like blinking stars. Somewhere below, someone was probably making the same mistakes Westron's executives had made. Somewhere else, someone was staying quiet. It never ended. But maybe it could pause. Maybe it could heal. He turned back to his desk, pulled out the old notebook. On a fresh page, he wrote, "Emily stands at the edge of something new. She will be tested. She will face threats, seduction, exhaustion. But she is fireproof in the ways that matter. I've passed the torch.
Now we must disappear again."
He closed the book and slid it into a drawer. At Westron the next morning, Emily's nameplate was affixed to a new glass office. Her first act was to schedule open-door meetings with every department, one per day.
No hiérarchie.
No permission needed. By noon, someone had already filed a complaint against her meeting structure. By 3 p.m., a junior designer sent a message. "I was harassed by a project manager last year. I stayed quiet.
Can he talk to you?"
She replied, "Yes."
Come anytime.
And just like that, the new culture took root, fragile but real. On Friday evening, Robert walked into Westron one last time. No security stopped him. The guards nodded. One even thanked him. He rode the elevator to the roof. Emily met him there. He looked out over the city.
"It's your now."
"Not just mine," she said.
"You built the floor. I'm just patching the walls."
He turned to her, eyes kind but firm. "Then patch them well. And when they try to silence you again, don't just knock.
Kick the damn door down." She looked softly.
"I will." He offered a hand. She took it. Then he turned, walked to the stairs, and was gone. And Emily stood alone on the rooftop of a company no longer owned by fear, looking out at a city that still needed fixing. She was ready. On Monday morning, the Office of Integrity and Employee Advocacy officially opened its doors. The office was modest, 2 glass rooms and a conference area tucked between HR and legal on the 17th floor. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in symbolism. It was the first physical space inside Westron designed entirely for transparency, not control. Emily Cotter arrived at 7 a.m., coffee in hand, shoulders squared. By 7:30, her assistant had posted the schedule for open sessions, and by 8 o'clock, the first employee was already waiting outside. He was young, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and a thin laptop clutched to his chest. He entered without speaking. Emily motioned toward the chair across from her.
"Take your time."
He nodded, then slowly opened his laptop and turned the screen toward her. A spreadsheet filled with manipulated figures. Internal invoices mismatched with receipts. Names in the comments section, none of them his. "I found it 2 months ago," he whispered. "Tried to report it. They said it was above my clearance." Emily didn't respond right away. She just reached forward, gently turned the laptop toward herself, and started reading. By noon, 4 more employees had visited her office. Some came with stories, others with questions, and one with tears in her eyes. "I thought we'd never be allowed to speak," she said, voice breaking. "Now I don't know how to start." "You just did," Emily replied softly. Meanwhile, across the building, the investigation escalated. The forensic audit team released its preliminary findings to the board: over $32 million in suspicious internal payments, offshore transfers linked to fictitious subsidiaries, and a coordinated pattern of employee silencing across 3 departments. The fallout was immediate. 2 high-ranking directors were placed on leave. 3 others resigned within 24 hours. One fled the country before his subpoena could be delivered. News outlets circled like vultures, publishing daily exposés that peeled back layer after layer of Westron's once pristine exterior. Emily kept working. But the days were growing heavier. For every step forward, there were murmurs behind her back. Whispers that she was a puppet, that she'd only gotten the role because of Robert Walker's protection. Some called her a traitor. Others just avoided eye contact. The truth had freed the company, but not its people. Not yet. On Wednesday, she met with department heads in the boardroom, 12 men and women, each with different degrees of loyalty, fear, and self-preservation. We need to implement structural change, Emily said firmly. We can't fix this by firing a few executives.
We need new system, real ones. Whistleblower protection. Transparent budgeting.
Rotational oversight on vendor contracts. One executive, a man from compliance, rolled his eyes. That's idealism. You're asking us to build a whole new institution. No, Emily said calmly. I'm asking you to remember what one is supposed to be. Silence followed. Then a quiet voice from the far side of the room. It was Jamie, head of product development. She was in her 40s, sharp, often silent. She's right, Jamie said.
I've been here 15 years.
I've watched people get promoted for silence and punished for integrity. Maybe it's time we tried something different. Emily met her eyes and nodded. Later that evening, she stood by the elevator with her coat in hand when a voice called her name. It was Jonah Lynn, former deputy to Lucas Dean. He had kept a low profile since the fallout, neither implicated nor exonerated. He approached slowly. You think this place can be saved? He asked. I think it has to be, she replied. He studied her. Then don't trust the applause.
It fad fast.
Real change starts when no one is watching. She didn't flinch. Good. That's exactly how I work. He gave a half smile.
Your main me off sommeon.
She didn't ask who. That night in her apartment, Emily stared out the window and wondered what kind of leader she had become. She wasn't Robert. She wasn't a founder. Or a revolutionary. Or a symbol. She was just someone who said no. Someone who stayed when it was easier to leave. But maybe that was enough. She opened her laptop and drafted a company-wide memo. Subject: This house belongs to us. Westron was not built by shareholders. It was built by people who showed up, on time, under pressure, and too often underappreciated. It's time we stopped rewarding power and started rewarding principle. Over the next 30 days, I'll be visiting every department to listen, learn, and rebuild. You will not be punished for honesty. You will not be overlooked for decency.
If you're afraid, come anyway. If you're angry, come speak.
This house belongs to us now.
Let's make it worth living in again.
She sent it. And for the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. The next day, her office filled faster than ever. One by one, people came. And one by one, the culture they thought was dead began to breathe again. By week 4 of the reconstruction effort, Emily Carter had become a name spoken with both reverence and resentment. The Office of Integrity now held weekly town halls, monthly reports, and direct access to the board. Several long-standing policies had been dismantled. Contracts were renegotiated, team leaders were reassigned based on behavior, not tenure. But with each change came resistance.
Qui est, stratégique, insidieux.
She noticed it first in the emails. Requests that used to be answered in minutes began to take hours. Calendar invites disappeared without explanation. Her assistant began to receive veiled comments in the break room. They're isolating us, the assistant whispered one afternoon. Not outright, but it's happening. Emily nodded. She had expected backlash. But this was calculated. She brought it to the board. I believe elements of the old guard are attempting to regain influence. I'm seeing a pattern. Documents misplaced, audits delayed, people suddenly unavailable. Judith Lang, still interim chair, tapped her pen on the table. We've noticed. There are whispers of internal sabotage, even possible retaliation. I need names, Emily said. We can't move on whispers, said another board member. Not again. But Emily knew better. In corporate warfare, whispers were never just air, they were prelude. Later that night, she received a text message from a blocked number.
You want transparency? Start with yourself.
Attached was a photograph. It was a zoomed-in image of her sitting at a bar with Robert Walker, taken 2 weeks prior. In it, Robert's hand rested gently on her arm. Her expression was soft, candid, human.
No signe criminal.
But enough to feed the rumor mill. Emily stared at it for a long time. Then she deleted it. They were trying to undermine her through association. Through implication. She opened her laptop and sent a secured message to Robert. They're back. Or maybe they never left. His reply came minutes later.
Some fear don't go out.
They just wait for wind. That wind came 3 days later. A Westron employee leaked a fabricated memo to the press, claiming Emily had manipulated the audit schedule to protect certain departments, including her own former team. The memo was well forged, but the timing, too precise to be coincidence, was a clear shot. The headline the next morning read, "Is the whistleblower now the cover-up?" Her inbox flooded with press inquiries. Anonymous staffers began whispering again. One called her a fraud. Another, just another player in the same game. Emily's hands trembled as she sat in her office, staring at the wall of testimony she had built. Files, logs, emails, photographs.
Could one lire soldis? No, she thought.
Not if truth speaks louder. She contacted Westron's independent audit firm and demanded an emergency press briefing. That afternoon, standing behind a plain podium in a neutral gray suit, she addressed the nation. There is a war for memory happening at Westron, she began. Not for profits, not for market share, but for truth. A truth that many would prefer be buried. She held up the forged memo. This document is false. Designed to distract you from what we've uncovered.
The fraud, the coercion, the corruption.
I will not be silenced by shadow games or media spins. The press fired questions. She answered each one, firm, precise, unwavering. By the end of the day, the audit firm confirmed the forgery. 3 employees were placed on immediate leave for digital misconduct. But the damage had been done. Not to her credibility, but to her heart. That night, she met Robert one last time, this time in a public park, benches cold under the winter moon. I'm tired, she said, voice thin. I thought truth would be enough. But it's never just truth. It's warfare. Every day. Every word. Robert nodded slowly. It doesn't get easier. But it gets clearer. She looked at him, exhausted. Why does this keep happening? Why do people fight against the very thing that would save them?
Because fear is loudé den raison. Because power feeds en silence.
He took a breath. But you've changed that. You broke their silence. And now they fear you. She didn't smile. She just looked down. I don't want to be feared, she whispered. I want to be believed. You are. He stood. Emily, he said, you've done what I never could. You didn't just expose them. You stayed. You built. She rose too. And then before walking away, he said softly, don't let the shadows write the ending. The next morning, Emily returned to Westron not with a new policy, but with a new story. She launched an internal podcast.
Westron Voices.
Each episode, an anonymous employee would share their experience, of hardship, of abuse, of survival, of hope. No scripts. No filters. Just voices. It became an instant success. Employees leaned in, listened, connected, even laughed. The company that once silenced began to listen to itself. And Emily, no longer just the whistleblower or the advocate, became something far more dangerous to the remnants of the old regime. She became a mirror. One they could no longer break. The final audit report was released on a cold Tuesday morning, 6 months after Robert Walker's return and Emily Carter's rise. It ran over 400 pages with appendices and footnotes, charts and summaries, but it could be distilled into one undeniable fact. Westron had been compromised from the top down, not by one villain or even a small cabal, but by a culture of silence, reward without merit, and fear as currency. The fallout was massive. 5 former executives were formally indicted.
3 pled guilty.
2 others vanished overseas and became international fugitives. And while the press swarmed around the dramatic headlines, something quieter, more meaningful happened inside Westron's walls. People stayed. People who had been beaten down, ignored, or discarded. They stayed. They worked. They built. The new Leadership Council, led jointly by Emily and a rotating board of department heads, instituted the company's first transparent budget review. Every dollar was now tracked, every bonus public, every vendor contract reviewed by at least 3 departments. More importantly, they changed how the company listened. Weekly listening sessions replaced quarterly surveys. Performance evaluations now included peer and community impact, not just numbers and deadlines. And Westron Voices, the internal podcast, had reached its 30th episode. One of the most played episodes was titled simply, The Janitor. In it, Robert Walker spoke for the first and only time since stepping away. His voice was older, quieter, but unmistakably firm. I built a company that became a reflection of my ego, he said. Then I vanished, hoping time would redeem it. But time redeems nothing. Only people do. And redemption isn't loud. It's the silent work of rebuilding. One truth at a time. That week, Robert left New York.
Nos press releases. Nos farewell memos.
Just a voicemail to Emily. I was never the legacy, he said. You are. You and everyone who chooses truth when it's easier to lie. Emily didn't cry. She just went to work. The months that followed were not easy. Lawsuits.
Presse attention.
Internal disagreements. Cultural fatigue. Some employees still left. Some still whispered. But the difference was, now they whispered in a house where the walls could hear. One afternoon, nearly a year after the first story broke, Emily received a letter. Not an email. Not a call. A handwritten letter. It was from Grace Lynn, the daughter of Jonah Lynn, the former deputy who had once warned her in the elevator. Jonah had passed away the previous week, quietly and without ceremony. In the letter, Grace wrote, My father never told me what he saw in you. But I know he respected you. And in the last months of his life, he watched Westron like someone watches the sky after a storm, quietly with hope. He said, Emily Carter did not save a company. She saved its soul. Thank you. Emily folded the letter and placed it in the drawer where she kept only 3 things.
Robert's original notebook. Her first whistleblower email. And now, 10.
That evening, she stood on the roof of Westron's headquarters. Below her the city pulsed, its lights, its noise, its endless chaos. But up here, it was still. She thought about all that had been lost. Trust. Friends. Time. Parts of herself she would never get back. But she also thought about what had been found. Dignity. Voice.
A pass forward.
She wasn't naive. She knew corruption never died. It hibernated, waited for weakness, for distraction, for fatigue. But now Westron was awake. She turned and walked down the stairwell, not for the last time, but for the 1000th. In the lobby, an intern was picking up dropped papers near the security desk. No one helped. Until Emily did. She knelt, gathered the papers, smiled at the intern. I've been there, she said.
The intern blinked.
Thanks.
You're Emily Carter.
I'm someone who picks up papers, she replied. The intern grinned. They say you changed everything.
Emily shook her head.
I just reminded people it could change. And she meant it. Change wasn't a speech. Or a policy. Or even a scandal. It was a choice. Made every day. By people who were tired of being afraid. By janitors who listened. By workers who dared. By truth that refused to go quiet. Later that week, at the close of the fiscal year, the board gathered for the final review. Profits had dipped, then stabilized. Employee retention was up. External trust, once shattered, was slowly being repaired. Judith Lang looked across the table at Emily. This is your win, she said.
Emily shook her head. This is our survival.
That's not the same. Judith nodded. And with that, the meeting ended. Outside the boardroom, a new mural had been painted on the lobby wall, commissioned by employees, designed by a janitor-turned-artist from the facilities team. The mural showed a single figure standing at the center of a storm, coat flapping, eyes forward, no name on the wall. Just words.
Silence built the system.
But courage cracked it. People walked past it every day. Some stopped. Some didn't. But it was there. Like the memory of a man who once returned wearing a janitor's uniform. Like the voice of a woman who refused to stay silent. Like a truth that, once spoken, could never be buried again. And so the story ended, not with applause or collapse or perfect justice, but with work, with people, with change.
Still unfinished.
But finally begun.